agree with everything Dave said. I think we're at the very beginning of the small cell. There's been a lot more hype about it than reality. I think we're getting to see some real small cell deployments in major cities, in major markets, where there is a lot of fiber, and where it might be a little bit more urgent for a carrier to do it. Verizon has been pretty aggressive. Most of the other carriers, you talked about AT&T, we talked about T-Mobile at length, and Sprint is just trying to still get their plan together and see where they're going. But from a reality standpoint, we're still working on a model that's going to work for Dave, and that's going to work for companies like ours that have to figure out how we're going to invest capital and make money and deliver a great product.
So PEG has had kind of a unique role in the market. And in fact, you're willing to deploy small cells on behalf of the operators, aren't you?
Absolutely.
And you'll bring the backhaul there, so you'll deliver a turnkey solution.
Yes, we will.
Is anybody taking that?
We have not found anybody that will take it on terms that we're willing to take.
Aha, it's all about the terms.
Yeah, it's about the economics. I mean, we're a financially driven business like most. There are some players out there that are trying to say, okay, we're going to go out and do this, and I think we're all learning what's really required, but it's not very different from macro cell backhaul. It's just closer together and smaller. Somebody quoted one of the carriers as saying the other day, it's 4 to 8 times as expensive for a small cell, and I think that's a pretty good number.
So who does the site work? Who goes and gets the real estate?
We have a team of people that do the site
Okay, so you'll take that off their hands as well.
Absolutely.
And how good are you at negotiating those deals?
We're very, very good.
Okay, but it's still 4 to 8 times. I mean, that's where all the cost is, right? It's in the deployment, it's in the venue, it's in the real estate.
It's also in the backhaul. I mean, you've got to get fiber. You've got to get fiber to these sites. You've got to get electricity
So
to
it
these
isn't about the
sites.
equipment.
The equipment's a piece of it, but it's not.
Maybe it's about installing the equipment.
Installing it, it's finding the sites, getting the regulatory stuff work done, getting the site acquisition done, getting electricity to the site, getting fiber to the site, and you're doing that all for generally a single carrier. And it's hard to do that for a single carrier.
But once you put a small cell at this location for a single carrier, you could play, tower strategy and put 2 or 3 there, right?
Maybe. They all have different strategies, and we're not sure what their strategies are. We just heard from Dave. He's figuring out his strategy. We know where Verizon is going. AT&T, we're not quite so sure about, and we're not so sure about Sprint, and they all want different flavors. So just because I put out a small cell somewhere doesn't mean that's the same spot that the next carrier wants. They may not want the same configuration. They may not want the same equipment. They may need it in different spots. And once they put it in that spot, there's no guarantee that they want it for a really long term.
Well, that's all on your contract. You got to sign a contract with these guys and lock them in, right?
They're tough to lock in. So we hear a lot about 20-year contracts, but that 20-year contract, in each of them, they have early termination liabilities, and sometimes those numbers can be very short-term commitments.
I would take 10 years if I were you. Ron, what's your perspective? Is this going to grow any faster?
Well, I think it has to grow faster for the reasons we've talked about. But I think, as Rich just said, we're all learning the business and how to make it work. I think not only are we learning it, the wireless carriers and the providers, but I think the jurisdictions that we're trying to deploy them in are learning too. They're trying to figure out how they want to handle them, what are they going to approve, and so forth. And that really affects the economics as well. The other thing Dave talked about was the certainty of deployment time. Okay, so you have the costs and the design and all that, but you've got to get the approvals you need to put the small cells wherever you need, and that takes time too. That's right. So I think that we've got to figure out a model that not only works between the carriers and the suppliers, but will work for the communities and the locations that we're trying to do it.
So some say that the work Verizon did in San Francisco is kind of a benchmark, that they were able to bring the density in San Francisco up very rapidly. They had some help. And we'll talk to Oliver about how they helped. But my understanding is they were able to achieve some of that industrialization that Dave's looking for. Am I right? Mum guys, huh? You guys are mum.
We probably have different standards around what industrialization means.
Higher standards, I hope.
I'll just say different standards.
Okay.
You know, I've seen, I'm not that close to the San Francisco stuff, but I've seen what was done in Chicago, and frankly, the difference in what we're trying to do on a site versus, this back to Rich's point, versus what some other carriers are trying to do on a site is radically different. I mean, I want to be up on a light pole with nothing more than 20 pounds, and that's not what I've seen in some of the other deployments. So I think there's a definitional difference that we need to be careful when we talk about small cells, so that we're clear we understand what everybody's trying to do, because they're radically different approaches and views as to what you need to do from a capacity perspective. And the other dimension to that is optimization of the radio plant and the backhaul costs. So in other words, if your backhaul costs are relatively low, you can afford to deploy more nodes and more radios. Can't do that, and you know, it depends on what you're trying to optimize. If you're trying to optimize your backhaul costs, you deploy a lot of radio stuff on a single node. But if you get your backhaul problem solved, the economics of deploying multiple radios, because the equipment, frankly, is not that expensive anymore.
Exactly right.
Is different, and that's frankly better from a radio environment perspective. That's a better solution for customers. Mm-hmm. So I think about it maybe a little differently than some other folks may think about it.
So how do you help manage the interference with the macros, and how does that architecture help you with that? Clearly, the small cells have to perform in a macro environment, right?
Mm-hmm. It's we haven't had challenges. I mean, we've some of the nodes that we've deployed, we've been very successful at taking a very significant percentage of the traffic off the macro layer with a single well-placed small cell. So that has not been an issue to date for us.
Cool, cool. So I'm going to bring Seb1 into this conversation because they're not in the deployment business. They monitor and gather data about network performance relative to these more densified networks, let's say. So how do you build into a deployment a method for monitoring and measuring performance so that it's not 2 years from now that we realize there's something, you know, a little bit messed up here and it's not working as well? How do you get in on the front end of this thing?
Yeah, no, great question. I think, you know, from our perspective, it's very much, you know, working hand in hand with the hardware vendors and the carriers. I mean, we're typically working, you know, 6 to 9 months out in front of where the industry is and where the industry is going in lab trials and with the hardware vendors, and able so that when someone like a T-Mobile or Peg or Tower and what all these guys are talking about go to market and get ready to roll it out, there is performance side by side. And I think, you know, everyone's kind of hit on this optimization. You know, it is very expensive for this fiber, and that's a huge piece of it. So how can we help understand what traffic patterns are on that fiber that's in the ground so that you can really optimize and understand where your traffic is going to, where it's coming from, and, you know, make continuous changes to the infrastructure to enable, really, at the end of the day, a better service for the customers.
So Matt, I mean, one of the things that you guys have brought to the table is you measure performance, including the backhaul, and in fact, backhaul is a big factor in what you do, right?
Yeah, huge. I would say all the cable companies in the U.S. use us for backhaul reporting for SLAs.
So you bring a lot to the party in terms of also helping plan where to deploy the small cell, where to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Absolutely. I mean, from looking at the traffic patterns, kind of going back to that and understanding where the network congestion is, we're able to pinpoint for carriers, you know, a particular market is much more saturated, and you look at, you know, certainly events that happen worldwide. You talk about things like Olympics and the World Cup and some of these events where you have a tremendous amount of influx of humans coming into an area, and today it's a very connected world. So how do you plan for an additional 1 to 2 million subscribers to come hit an infrastructure that was potentially not built for that 6 to 12 months ago, and, you know, you've got a 12-month lead time to grow the infrastructure to get there. So understand what is normal in the infrastructure today, and then understand where do you think you're going to need to be with a, you know, a massive influx of subscribers. So
guys, have the vendors helped this process sufficiently to get us to that industrialized you know, capability? You know, we're starting to see some reconsideration. You know, Ericsson wasn't really a big advocate of small cells for the longest time. Now they've got a dot, but it's for indoor. How serious are these guys about delivering what the market needs in terms of equipment?
Oh, I think, yeah, I mean, I'll take that one. I think I was going to take it. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we have two OEMs, and, you know, they both have brought solutions to market that we think are going to actually meet our requirements very well. You know, going back, and I go back to the weight issue. That's a big deal for us to the extent that we want to be able to deploy a large number of nodes as opposed to, you know, just a scaled down macro. And there's tools in the toolbox to do that. And the guys have anticipated, both of the OEMs have anticipated that really well.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think we're starting to see even Cloud RAN starting to make an impact on that in terms of changing the architecture, right?
Yeah, I think that's a ways away. I mean, it's interesting. I spent some time with one of the guys this morning, and they'd done a study on latencies in our network, and frankly, the latency that we have intrinsic in the backhaul network is we can get a big chunk of the Cloud RAN benefit without going to dark fiber because of the latencies that we're realizing across the network. So that's actually a really good thing.
It's a fantastic thing. If you can pool your baseband, and is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, we'll see the benefits. I'm not sure we have to pool the baseband necessarily.
Oh,
it's better.
An on-carrier method, huh? Okay, I'll take it.
We're always working, you know that.
And that's one of the things that affects all of these things in the industry. The technology keeps changing, and when you go to the manufacturers, they continue to drive some of that, but they need to understand what the carriers want, and the more the technology changes, the more that long-term deal versus short-term deal and who takes the risk as that technology changes comes into play.
So up till now, we've been talking largely about fiber, and we just talked about it again, whether it's dark or lit or whatever. But in fact, a lot of small cells will be deployed where there is no fiber. And we need other solutions, other techniques to backhaul that still scale, that can also address non-line of sight. How promising are we there? I know you guys are a bit fiber biased, right?
Well, I'd say we in the initial deployment we were highly fiber biased. That shifted a little bit as we've gotten into more rural areas of the country. We frankly had to move a little bit more towards microwave, and that's actually an okay and an appropriate thing in those environments. We'll see small cells in urban and suburban areas, and I think you'll see a combination of solutions, between non-line of sight, microwave, as well as fiber. Yeah, right. And I think it'll, which is a beautiful thing because that creates choice, and I love choice.
Go ahead.
So I think that there's a lot of advance happening in the wireless backhaul space to try to be able to backhaul the small cells without the fiber there. I don't think they're there yet in terms of what we've found in terms of how it works, and I think they have implementation issues with them as well in terms of the costs of attaching where you're going to wireless backhaul to, and so forth. We know how fiber works, and fiber was obviously the big lead in macro cell site backhaul. So I think it is taking the lead in small cell. I think a couple things that I would say about that is that serving small cells with fiber is very different than serving macro cells with fiber. There's different situations in the design. I think it really requires the RF engineers from the carriers to work with the fiber backhaul providers to design the nodes in a manner that are efficient from a fiber perspective, not just an RF perspective. Most of the macro network was initially designed from an RF perspective. We figured out how to get fiber there. In doing small cells, there's a lot of stranded fiber and wasted fiber, and you can't really justify the economics with single-purpose fiber. You've got to be able to do something else with that cable as well, a shared infrastructure, so we can get to the cost points that the carriers are going to require.
That's the point. If and I had this conversation internally a few weeks ago, it's like, gosh, if we get the pricing on this stuff right, I don't have to hit every point specifically, and it may take me 2 nodes to do it. I'm going to need the capacity over some horizon anyway. Mm-hmm. So let's not be silly about it and try and be overly precise about the solution, but that's predicated on getting the cost points down to a level that's acceptable.
And again, I think when we do integrate wireless backhaul, it does create another challenge for performance, right? So what do you guys do to deal with wireless backhaul at SEV1?
From our perspective, we take two approaches. One from the carrier side and one from who's providing the backhaul side. And I think from who's providing the backhaul, for us, it's all about ensuring the SLAs. So leveraging technologies such as Y1731, which I know a lot of carriers are now requiring for part of the SLA for the backhaul that they're buying. And then on the flip side, from the carrier perspective, it's understanding how much of that pipe is actually being used that they're purchasing. And the other part of it is that pipe that they're purchasing actually what it truly is? In some of the work we've done, we've seen, increasing actually backhaul capacity in one particular location for a carrier. They actually saw latency go up. So they said, that's no value to me as I'm trying to roll out, VoLTE and other real-time communication services. So, being able to have the checks and balances kind of on both sides of the fence from us has proven very valuable for both the carriers and the backhaul providers.
So do we consider wireless backhaul a temporary solution until we can get fiber there, or is it something that may stay in place for a long period of time?
So we're about 30% in our network wireless. And what we do is build rings and build fiber laterals and then extend with wireless. If you get back to fiber quickly, wireless is a great long-term solution. It gets more challenging the more bandwidth you need, but technology continues to improve. And I think you're going to see the same thing in small cell backhaul, where the technology continues to improve both line of sight and non-line of sight. But you've got to, you don't want to get too far out in front of that technology because the technology is going to get better. But I think wireless is going to stay a good solution and a piece of the solution.
So you're talking about single hop?
We do up to 3 hops today.
Up to 3 hops?
Up to 3 hops.
And you're treating your fiber as aggregation?
Yes.
Okay. So you're running more like a star?
No.
Collecting ring?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. Okay. But out of each of those hubs, out of those collecting hubs, you're coming out with multiple wireless connections, right?
That's
and
correct.
You're running out 3 hops.
That maximizes.
Maximize it.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that an acceptable architecture for T-Mobile?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I temper it and say the places where that architecture is, in my experience, typically used tends to be more rural.
Yeah.
Of course it is. That's where PEG is.
As opposed to urban areas, which that wouldn't be acceptable, but in an urban environment, it's a reasonable solution to a difficult problem.
It is a difficult problem. Yeah. And you've got to have a coverage architecture to address these rural areas. And not only rural areas, but even suburban areas, actually. Ron, what are you saying?
Yeah. I just want to comment, we had a little different experience with wireless backhaul and microwave than what Rich just talked about. And we did start out about 20% of our network was microwave backhaul and 80% fiber. And our experience was that the combination of bandwidth growth from the anchor tenant and adding additional tenants or wanting to reach further out and increase the number of hops put too much strain on that wireless link. And, in hindsight, it would have been better to just build fiber out there to begin with. Okay. Yeah. And I think that, that's going to possibly be replicated in the small cell space. And it happened to us both in urban markets and rural markets. And part of what I think is interesting about small cells, I think, at least from my perspective, it seems the industry is looking longer and willing to enter into longer term contracts so you can get the right permanent solution in there, from the get-go. The wireless solutions, they don't scale as cost efficiently as sometimes they're advertised. Sure. And there's also the attachment fees you got to pay, the real estate costs of where you're going to connect and attach that other unit. So I really think wireless does need to be a part of it. We have to have things in our toolkit, as Dave has said. But I think that really working together with how do you maximize the long-term solution, being willing to enter into long-term contracts will allow us to get fiber out there deeper and then complement that with wireless where it makes sense.
Dave, have you tested non-line of sight microwave?
Yeah, we actually had a link up on Saturday for a big event in Rikers Island. It was called electric zoo that you might have seen. So yeah, we've actually done some fun things there. It's a very, very promising technology that, that we think will continue to mature. It's approaching the point of being mature enough to deploy, but we think it'll continue to mature, and the bandwidths that we'll be able to realize with non-line of sight will continue to grow over the next couple, 3 years.
Sub 6 gig?
Yeah.
So that's a sweet spot, right?
Yep. It's good stuff. It's
Yeah,
good stuff.
I mean, that could change the economics quite a bit.
It will.
Particularly if you can get the latency right.
So far, so good.
So far. So it sounds to me then some of the challenges that we've been talking about are being addressed. Somebody's listening, somebody's working at it, trying to solve the problem. But we still have some challenges left. Ron, what do you think is the thing that's in the way?
Well, I think the challenges are trying to get those rights that you need to put the small cell where it works for the carrier, but it also works economically.
So real estate?
Real estate is critical to it. Real estate, and then, like I said earlier, working together to optimize the design. A lot of times you'll be, you have to first work with the municipality or the entity or whatever to figure out what are your options, what are your costs for attachment, and then you got to work within that constraint. And what we found is that sometimes the carriers look at it from an RF perspective, and they want to aggregate to a smaller number of hubs or something like that. That just has a big impact on the fiber design and raises the cost of getting that done. And so we've been able to work with our customers to figure out, how do we, look at a balance there and really build the backhaul as part of the base of the design, along with what the RF desirement or requirement is.
I keep coming back to I don't view this problem to be drastically different. There's a couple of the real estate dimension and the power dimensions that are different, but it's not fundamentally different than the backhaul problem we solved 8 years ago. And frankly, that's the way we're going to approach it.
So, I could argue that these guys are backhaul companies that have entered the market and are trying to make small cells work. The tower companies are doing basically the same thing, am I right? They're coming in and trying to bring unique approaches, leveraging the infrastructure they've built. Some are buying backhaul fiber companies to bring that along to the party. But are they coming at the problem with the right approach, or are they coming with a tower company mentality?
Is that for me?
Not me.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. You've got a fairly consolidated industry that has a belief about the way things should operate, and they're obviously going to try and pursue the same economic strategy that's worked for them in the past. But I think this is fundamentally different. This is a fundamentally different problem because of the choice that I talked about earlier, and I'm actually pretty bullish about the opportunity from a carrier perspective, to the extent that the availability of vertical choice coupled with the robust fiber plant that's available is just going to, frankly, gives us lots of, particularly in the urban areas where this is going to be, kind of the first wave of small cells will occur, is really going to create an environment which is going to be, it's frankly a little bit more difficult to navigate through, because there's not a logical natural selection as there was when we did backhaul. There was a very natural selection as to what we did in each market. In this problem set, there are more choices, and hence it's going to be a little more difficult to navigate through what the ultimate solution is. But again, I think it comes down to filtering through that on a market-by-market basis and finding a solution that meets most of the needs.
So I find that if I ask you a more specific question, you'll give me a real answer. You sold your towers. You sold your towers.
I thought that was pretty specific.
It was very specific. You sold your towers. Can the tower company leverage the tower base that's out there, the macro base that's out there, to create a hubbing system for small cells that naturally ties into your network, that mitigates interference, that provides you inherent backhaul solutions? Is there any advantage to building it on top of your macro?
Well, I think the macro network is an element of it, particularly to the extent that microwave is part of the solution. We've already got a backhaul network that,
Exactly.
spans the
Scalable.
metropolitan areas, and it's easy to attach to those sites, provided the rates are reasonable. And that's another trade-off point.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little more complicated a problem, and I don't disagree with your statement, than what we went through with backhaul the first time through. But it's fun because there's a lot of choice. There are a lot of opportunities to get things done, and that's always what you want. Unlike what we went through with backhaul, it was challenging sometimes. Right? It was challenging to get there, and I think this the environment that we have is we've got a lot of fiber in the ground in metropolitan areas. That's a good thing, and a diverse set of folks that have rights to that fiber. There's a lot of verticality. It's a matter of just getting the things to line up.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to use the last 10 minutes to get to some topics we haven't talked about yet. For some reason, CTIA has been turned into 5G world, and everybody's talking about 5G as though it's around the corner. Now, we heard yesterday that there's marketing 5G and there's technology 5G. And if the Un-carrier has its way, there'll be a marketing 5G on your roadmap, and you won't have to do anything differently, right? You just call it 5G. Yeah. Am I right, Dave?
Well, I guess I'd go back to, our answer to the 5G question is, hell, we just rolled out LTE in the last 36 months.
Why not
for God's sakes,
why not just
want to sweat that for a while and utilize that?
Let's relabel
That's right.
LTE Advanced 5G and get some more money out of it.
That's, yeah, sure.
See, I'll get you to be the marketing guy soon. Weren't you the one who renamed HSPA Plus 4G?
Yeah, I noticed somebody did that the other day.
I think that's the way to do it. Why should we call LTE Advanced?
What do they say? Emulation is the finest form of flattery?
What does LTE Advanced buy us? It doesn't give us any incremental revenue,
it's
right?
Just capacity.
It's just capacity. So talking about 5G, and we know it's really about what the next protocol is, what the next spectrum is, and none of us know that. It's not going to happen for another 5 years.
Not 16.
The roadmap that we know is what's happening with LTE Advanced.
Right.
And at the same time, we're coming along with, NFV and trying to change the way we use equipment to put it on standardized servers.
Sure.
Shouldn't that also influence our densification? Shouldn't we be treating small cells as though they're virtualized into our network?
Yeah, all things in time. I think that'll happen. It's a matter of time.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of how fast do you need to deploy capacity, and is the technology going to be available at the point in which you have to meet the capacity requirement? And you're also bumping up against the need to figure out how to industrialize this. And I don't think that we can all wait for virtualization and then one day the light bulb goes off and say, oh, it's time to do virtualized small cells. Let's go do that. Well, it doesn't work that way. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy to figure out how to crack the code on this thing and truly industrialize it. And that process needs to start now.
So I think Dave's laid out a challenge a couple of times. He's repeated this term industrialized so many times. It's finally had.
Oh, you started using it. I love it.
It's finally got meaning to me. How does SEV1 support MNOs like T-Mobile USA as they move through this journey? What do you really? Because I know they're a customer. What do you do for them?
From our perspective, it's about understanding, where they're starting to virtualize and what components of the infrastructure. And once we understand that, it's working with them to collect the relevant metrics to it that we can then feed back to the orchestration and the controllers. So we're really completing that automation and that continuous feedback loop. So providing analytics on the information that's coming out of these devices, feeding it back to say, hey, spin up more, spin something else up, spin something else down, reroute capacity. Certainly some of the new features and functions that we're seeing come out in some of these controllers allow a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of what you want to do and how you want to orchestrate the infrastructure. So from our view, it's really providing the analytics to drive that.
So John Ledger tweeted this morning, he's going to provide unlimited Netflix at no additional cost. So how does he actually turn that up and make it work? Not you. I'm asking Sev 1. How do they do it?
That's a David question.
No, it is not. And I made that up, by the way. That's not real.
I was going to say.
But what I'm saying is,
that's a
he
lot of
could wake
capacity.
up, Dave, am I wrong? He could wake up tomorrow and say that and decide that's going to happen. That's going to be part of your offering. And when he does, it's going to change usage patterns so dramatically, very quickly, right?
Right.
And that's the kind of wake-up call we need for our network, the ability to respond when marketing makes a change like this. He did it with Pandora, didn't he? He did it, right? He did it with audio streaming. Why not do it with video streaming? And I'm not saying he's going to do it tomorrow, but he might. He's that unpredictable. But, you know, maybe Dave will have to actually have a network that can do it. Can he do it?
He's got enough capacity. I don't see why not. Either that or start dropping
Maybe
people.
he'll only do it for his really good customers like me, right?
Exactly.
Good.
But it's understanding, right? It's understanding where the flow's coming from, where it's going to, and I think that's the insight that we're, giving someone like a T-Mobile, to make those intelligent decisions.
I picked on T-Mobile enough. Let me pick on peg bandwidth for a moment. So your function has been primarily in the second and third tier markets, right? So I won't call them rural, but it's outside of the urban areas. But in fact, that's where the growth is. That's where population is growing rapidly. Am I wrong?
That's correct.
This is where coverage and capacity is going to be needed next. What are we really doing to make that capacity available, and how does your network complement what the MNOs have already built?
Sure. So we're a fiber-based business, so we're building dense fiber in rural markets. And that's going to support all aspects of bandwidth utilization. That's why the company is
Talk to them. Don't talk to me.
The company is peg bandwidth, and we're going to support all levels of fiber, all levels of bandwidth and bandwidth. Everything you hear in every meeting that you're sitting in at this conference is about the explosion of bandwidth. And we need to build more fiber in rural areas. There's a lot of fiber in the urban markets. There's not much fiber in the rural markets.
Okay, so we understand fiber. Got that understood. That's yesterday. Tomorrow is providing turnkey small cell solutions. We already started to do that with coming to the macro. Are you serious about putting capital behind that?
Absolutely, if we can find a model that works. So we're a financially driven business, and we're going to look for ways that either a carrier can support that themselves, or we can have a neutral host model that multiple carriers can support. We've been very, very aggressive in deploying capital, deploying a lot of capital into very rural markets, and we want to continue to do that. But it needs to be a partnership, and as we talk about microwave, that affects the tower companies as well. They've got to be partners in those aspects of things, and looking at a rural market and saying, how do we figure out pricing and structure that works?
Great. So let's do the same thing for Tower Cloud. Obviously, you want to play a big role in this transformation and the densification. Mm-hmm. Where geographically do you play? How do you help operators achieve these goals?
Okay, good. So we're geographically, we're in the southeast of the United States. We operate in large markets like Atlanta, tier 2, tier 3 markets, Columbus, Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, and little rural places that you haven't heard of. So we're a little bit of everywhere. And our foundation was, of course, lit, Ethernet backhaul to the macro sites. And a lot of that is moving now to dark fiber with certain carriers, and as we're expanding out our business, we're really looking at all of the needs of the wireless carrier. I think that the small cell needs that they have need to be thought about today while you're addressing the macro problem, or you're not going to be able to address it properly. Dave talks about all the fiber that is available in the the big cities, but that fiber is not inexpensive to access, okay? You can't just, plug into it at any point. And so when we're building our new networks, we're taking that into account, and we're thinking about the future access points that are going to be needed, the future strands that are going to be needed and so forth, and trying to complement that, into our business models today. And I really think it takes a long-term view to make sure that happens. There's a lot of bandwidth growth happening, but on our side, we're seeing densification really is what's happening, rather than more bandwidth at the same site. Certainly bandwidth is going up on a site-by-site basis, but I think it would be going up a lot faster, but for the densification. And I think because of the spectrum issues that Dave talked about, it's going to continue. So fiber operators got to build fiber networks differently to address the small cell access need of the future than the way we built them to serve carriers and enterprises and things like that. And so that's what we're trying to address while bringing in the capabilities of being able to do the turnkey solution for small cells.
You see more consolidation coming?
I think there's always a trend for consolidation, but then there's always new companies that are going to come up and innovate and find a new way to do it, and then they're going to be consolidated. And that's usually good from a value perspective.
On that note, I think we should clap and thank these guys for being good sports.